Okay, welcome everybody to this first Film in Africa podcast. This is a podcast about African cinema, and every episode we will be looking at one African film, and then we will be unpacking it. That's kind of the structure of the podcast, but for today we're just introducing the podcast and how it came about. So my name is Dylan Valley. I'm a filmmaker and I teach at UCT. I'm a lecturer at UCT, and the course I convene is called Film in Africa. And so out of that course, we decided it would be fun to do a podcast about the course, especially because there's not a lot of podcasts about African cinema, number one. And number two, there are not many that are actually situated on the African continent, which is why we thought it would be important to do this from here in Cape Town, in South Africa. And so that's how the idea for the podcast came about. And so for the first episode, I thought it'd be cool to actually have one of our students, a master's student who tutored on the course and has actually knows the course intimately and also is a fan of African cinema, Thutuka Qoza, who's also a gaming guy.
Lover of film,
master's student. What else?
Human. I can't think of much else at the moment, but yeah.
Renaissance man.
I guess.
So, and you're also a ex-Rhodesian.
Yes, ex-Rhodes student all the way. Purple Rats, let's go. Pothole and Donkey.
As we used to call the university currently known as Rhodes, as people started calling it during Fees Must Fall.
Yeah, still known as Rhodes for now, but we'll see what happens in the near future.
So, anyway, Thutuka, maybe we can start with like, what's your like favorite African film, and what was some of your favorite moments from the course, and from doing film in Africa?
Yeah, so I've been tutoring this course I think now for 3 years, and that's obviously like each year is very different, and you kind of get to see that, oh wow, each batch of students is different, even though the film corpus stays the same. And I would say actually the one that's been consistently loved by students and the one that students consistently choose every year is actually Noire by Osman Sembène.
One of my faves.
Yeah, you actually introduced me to the film in our honors course. And I was like, I remember writing my essay on it, and I was like, yeah, this is where the sauce is at. This is where the juice is at. So I think I love the film, not for its flashiness, but for its consistency over time. Like, it's a very old movie, but it's got staying power, and it's got it resonates with students and audiences like for a long time, and I think that means something. So when choosing a favorite film, it's not always the big ones, like your flashy Nollywood ones, Lionheart, etc., but it's the ones that consistently can become classics over time and keep resonating with audiences.
Yeah, that's such a good one, because I remember watching Noire there for the first time. I think it was, the first time I watched it was very recently, actually, maybe only about 10 years ago. I mean, I'm old, so 10 years ago is like yesterday. But there was a screening of it at the Johannesburg, I think it was called the Johannesburg Women's Film Festival. I might be getting it wrong. But they had screened it at Constitution Hill, at Con Hill, at the women's prison, where Winnie Mandela was kept and Fatima Mir. And there was a big open air screening of it with a beautiful picture and beautiful sound. And that was the first time I saw it, and I realized like how important it also is to like have those things right when you are screening films. And it just blew me away. And the problem with African cinema is we're often getting, because it's so hard to access the stuff, we're often getting a ripped copy off of a ripped copy. Like a lot of the African cinema that we watch, even in the course, like Mapansula, you could only get copies that were ripped off of VHS because it was a banned film. So like we used to seeing African cinema as this kind of like degraded quality in terms of like the actual image and stuff, but that's not like really how the stuff was shot. Like it was often shot like really, really well on 35mm and stuff. Film. But anyway, yeah, Le Noire also gets better every time you watch it. I've watched it so many times now, and it's like, for me, it's one of those films that's like, you see different things each time, because it's quite a simple film, like quite a simple narrative, but it's every element of the film in terms of the mise en scène, the sound, and like it's all like really well thought through, and the storytelling. And Sembène being a novelist also means he understands like rich inner storytelling of the worlds of the characters. And it's a film that was the first, also like it's the first film by an African in sub-Saharan Africa. So it's like a very significant film. Some people call it the first African film, feature film. That's a bit contested, but it's definitely like the first feature film by an African filmmaker in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. But it's so relevant still today. Like, did you feel like when you watch it, did you see any like similarities in terms of like our own society and that kind of?
Yeah, I think. Well, growing up with a granny who was a housekeeper, and then seeing the changes between the generations, between her, my mom, and then us, and also seeing like the double consciousness that Du Bois speaks about, the split between the love of mother country, Senegal, but also France, and the ideals and the disappointment that comes from there. And you realize that in a way that's something that's still happening today. And it's something that's still relevant to how people can like look at certain cultures or countries or societies and be like, this is when I get there, I've made it. And then you get your wish fulfilled, the monkey's paw. And when you're finally there, you're like, this is absolutely not what I expected. And then how that plays out. But also, like you said, it's one of those films where when you watch it, all the great novels, all the great stories, the more you watch it, the more you love it, the more you're like, wow, there's so much more to hear. Many long walks and cups of tea, and you're like mulling over it the whole time. And it's definitely, it's a special film. And I didn't know that it was the first African film, but I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, man. Like it was a home run, first one. Yeah, absolutely. Great.
Yeah, I like that. It's like a home run. It really is, because you're like, if you want to show somebody like African cinema, and you can be like, you can point to that film and say like, this is like the first like major one, like watch this. And I often like send it to people because it's on YouTube, so you can just like send the link to people. But I do feel like there is a resistance even among film buffs to watch African cinema, because there's this like automatic idea that it's gonna be like bad in some way, that it's like not as like, where do you think that comes from? Like, why do we have this idea that African cinema is like boring, or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think about so just this week, I had a student who was doing a summer course at UCT, and he asked me he's doing, I think, a gender studies course. So he asked me for a film about the intersection between blackness and feminism. So I was like, okay, I suggested Lobola. A Woman's Bride Price. I forget the exact name of the movie. It's a documentary. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I'd seen the movie when I went to the Nigerian AFRIF that was in Nigeria. And I was like, this is a cool film. And so I was just telling him about it and like explaining that this is the one. If you want easy points and you want to like a film that gets everything in one, you don't have to like watch 5 films. Everything that's kind of got what you're looking for, this is the one. And then that film came out 2023. We couldn't find one. We couldn't find a place to buy it, to stream it on any of the streaming websites. So it's not even that. It had quite a few awards from what I understand. But why do people think African film is boring? Is because there's no access to it. And so that thing that you don't have access to, that you can't easily get a hold of and watch, then it's going to be, you're going to see it as, it's almost like the fox and the sour grapes. Those grapes were sour anyway because you couldn't get hold of it. So I think there's a distribution problem that's happening. Also, who gets to tell the stories as well. Oftentimes when you do get African cinema, it's my opinion that many times it comes through a Western lens. In other words, sometimes they're putting in people and they're like, okay, you can go, but this is what we want from your film. Make it as Western, as American as possible. And that can work sometimes. We do live in a global society, but I also think that you need your films that don't necessarily have the Western-ish buzz about them. That should be able to be seen. And they can both exist at the same time rather than either or. Yeah.
You remind me of this great clip that's going around on TikTok and Instagram now of Ousmane Sembène, who made Le Noire there.
Est-ce que vos films sont bien compris en Europe?
Non mais mettons-nous bien ça dans la tête. Moi, l'Europe n'est pas mon centre. L'Europe est une périphérie de l'Afrique. Ils sont restés plus de 100 ans chez moi, ils n'ont pas parlé ma langue, je parle leur langue. Pour moi, l'avenir ne dépend pas d'être compris par l'Europe. Je souhaiterais qu'ils me comprennent, mais ça ne me fait absolument rien. Si vous prenez la carte de l'Afrique, géographiquement, vous pouvez mettre l'Europe et l'Amérique, il nous restera encore de la place. Pourquoi voulez-vous que je sois comme le tournesol qui tourne autour du soleil? Je suis moi-même le soleil.
Europe is not my center. Europe is not my sun. I am the sun. Europe is on the periphery. I am my own sun. So he's like saying, no, yeah, like, I don't really care. Like, I'm making this stuff, like, for myself. So he's not... So like you're saying, we're often thinking about how do we make this more Western? How do we appeal to, like, an audience that... Because we have to compete. Filmmakers have to compete with, you know, like Game of Thrones or like whatever else is popular now.
Yeah.
And so you kind of... People think, okay, we have to make...
An African Game of Thrones.
African Game of Thrones, yeah. Which is not a bad idea, but it's like we have to also like untether ourselves from only trying to appeal like in the same, like storytelling in the same structures and the same ways and that kind of thing.
I think we flourish in diversity. In other words, like you can have your South African Game of Thrones and it can be like your Shaga Ilembe or whatever, and that's perfectly fine. But if we are storytellers, we need to find a diversity in storytelling and say that in literature you get your Gothic novels, you get your pastoral novels like about nature and the interaction, but then you get your sci-fi, your adventure. Each of these are modes of storytelling. And so I think if African cinema is going to be its true self, it also needs to find an African way of storytelling, and that can exist alongside your blockbuster Hollywood-esque African cinema as well. But it could also just be a film about Lobola, which is maybe completely removed from a Western context, if that made sense. To the point of where it might be strange to a European or American audience, but completely understandable to an African, South African audience, and that's fine. And then people can choose and they can have the best of both worlds rather than saying it needs to be either or from there. But I suppose this is an ideal world and funding will always be an issue. And I'm not a funding guy, but I can dream, and that's my hope.
I hope the funders are listening. Guys, you better be watching this podcast. Listen. The other thing I wanted to say was, I wanted to ask you about, like, and this ties into what we're talking about, which is, like, why do you think it's important that we study this stuff? Like, if you were to talk to students who are going to be taking this course, and they're listening, like, what would you say is, like, why is a course like this important? Why is it important to and conversations like this for our more, like, broader podcast audience, like, why is it important to be talking about African cinema? Why is it important to be watching it and studying it?
Yeah, this might be a bit philosophical, but I'll try to make it as relevant as possible. I believe in agency and storytelling, that telling stories is formative for the individual's sense of self and agency and how they view the world. And so humans, something in our brain is that we tell stories. That's just what we do. We've done it since humanity began, and we're still doing it now. And so there are options. You can tell your own story, or someone else can tell your story from there. And so oftentimes when we've allowed, when I mean we as humans, have allowed other people to tell our stories, what generally happens from there is that the story gets misconstrued or changed, or there's a certain distance from the culture, the language, the people, the geography that prevents the story from being true, or being true to what the person who would tell that story would identify with. And so I think if you don't tell your own story, and this is now us as Africans, then someone else is forced to. And so oftentimes we've had African stories told from a Western context solely, to the point of where we've been like, I've watched like Black Panthers is one of those where we're like, we had a few people like struggling with Xhosa and being like, yo guys, could you not find people who could, at least speak the language plausibly, if that makes sense. Or better language coaches, etc. But I think when you find out who's coaching them and going through them, you're like, okay, it starts making sense. Great film, absolutely not putting down on it, but I mean, like,
no shade.
No shade. We love you, Ryan Coogler. Love Sinners.
love you, Ryan.
Sinners is fantastic, but there's and even I think he would argue that in Sinners, for example, is that he wanted to tell the story about music from an African perspective through Africans, or even if it's like African Americans, etc. So it's just the same thing. And so it's allowing agency for people to tell their own stories. And so for me, I think it's important for Film in Africa, in that people can tell stories about what's happening here. What are some of the ways, what our creativity, the way we think about the world, because we're not homogenous. We're not a monolithic human race where everyone's the same. We've got diversity to offer. And so I think it's just important that we could even have a film about like what's happening in Athlone, and that would be an African film, and it would be very different to what's happening in Zululand in KZN, or Nigeria, elsewhere, Morocco, etc. It's just about there's stuff happening, and it's interesting, and it's beautiful, and it's moving, and it's touching, and it's on the African continent, and it's made by Africans. And I think although someone from elsewhere could try and tell the story, and I think they would be welcome to, if done ethically, whatever that means, that it should always, the first port of call should be someone who understands and gets the story, lived experience, to some degree. Yeah.
Okay, awesome, man. Yeah, that's a great answer.
Sorry, I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. I feel like we just end right now. Like that would be, it's like a mic drop moment. Yeah. But I had a couple more things I want to discuss just quickly. Cool. But like you're young, you're
relatively
young, you're hip, you know what's going on. You're like
broke.
What do you, because you also like online, you're into gaming. What do you think, in the context of, okay, this is like, I don't even want to touch on AI too much. But in the context of all the things that's changing in the world technologically and everything, and games and, VR and all this kind of stuff, and also Netflix and, like maybe like the opening up of new platforms, what do you see the future of African cinema? What do you think it's going to be like?
That's a hard question. I haven't thought about that one. Let me just run through the matrix quickly, process the bits. Yeah. What do I think it's going to be? I've got my answers. I've got no clue. But I think it's going to be good, whatever it looks like. I do think that from my students and speaking to them, they definitely, like, I've been a bit of a negative Nancy, and I've come in being like, we need to fix African cinema and we need to do ABC. And they've like corrected me and called me out a few times and been like, no, there's good African films. Like, let me plug you in. And then they're like, go watch this. And I go and watch and I'm like, oh, that's pretty stellar. That's pretty amazing from there. Where you watch and you're like, this is what I'm looking for. I haven't been able to put it in words, and there seems to be an occurrence where there's more and more and more of that. To the point of where it's not just like an anomaly, but it's becoming like people are getting the point of being able to tell you a whole story. Like it feels like there's a worldwide zeitgeist in allowing people the agency to see themselves represented, to represent their stories and to tell those stories. And I'm like, I'm 100% for it. And so I think it's not straight like that, but it's like a rocky edge, and sometimes it ebbs down and sometimes it goes, but the general course is heading up from there. I mean, speaking of games, can I give an example? So I'm currently playing through a game called Ghost of Yote, which is the sequel to a game called Ghost of Tsushima. And essentially this is like Mongols invading, this is the first one, and like Japanese and then the Mongols, and it's just a revenge tale, learns how to become a ninja, fun stuff. But then, and that was like lauded. So they made a sequel, Ghost of Yote, and it's set like 400 years later when like Europeans started coming into the island of Yote, Japan, and guns and whatnot. But one of the things that they have is they've got people on the island of Yote called the Ainu. And for the longest while I was like, oh, why, like what's going on with these people? But like playing with them and interacting with them, I realized that it was something in their subtitles where none of their names were capitalized, and I was like, is this just like an accident? But I realized it's every time the Japanese people were speaking to the Ainu, who are the native inhabitants of that island. So Japan basically colonized that island. Whenever they spoke to the native people, those people never shared their first true names with non-Ainu. They'd only share their names with other Ainu people. So whoever they gave, they'd be like, if your name is Dylan, you'd be like Beanstalk Jack, and then you'd share that. But I'm
going to use that name.
Beanstalk cool Jack.
Name. Yeah.
And so even there, I like went up and read about the history of the Ainu, and I spent like a good hour like reading up on it. And I mean, when I went on Twitter and stuff, I was looking and people like, yeah, Ainu representation is real, and like getting to, and so just a game where it's, people sometimes see it as a fairly stupid pastime, you know, like you could be doing better stuff with your life. But now there's people who are like trying to preserve Ainu language, preserving Ainu culture, elevating it, praising it, and also like calling Japan out for what they view as a mistake in their history and something that happened, but also saying like it's we can move forward together, and it's not by erasing and pretending it didn't happen, but by highlighting and so that's just the game. And I think if that's happening in small incremental places with games and cinema, we're heading in the right direction from there. So yeah, like it's happening. It's just it's slow, and that's okay. The changes we make now don't have to be just for us. They can be for the people who follow us from there. I don't have kids, but if I ever do, they'll have less of a fight to fight than we did in this particular case. They'll have their own fight to fight, though.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And I think it's like, what I'm also getting from what you're saying is like, you know, there's different ways of storytelling. There's different modes of African storytelling. And I think one of the great things about being in a film and media studies center, like which we are in the Center for Film Media Studies, is that you get to like learn how the media studies theory of how all this stuff is actually connected, how film and television and online TV forms and TikTok, these are all like kind of part of the same tradition in different branches, and games as well. So it's like there's different ways in which African storytelling can progress in the future. And I think even with AI, it might open up like tools for like people who normally wouldn't have been able to
Yeah.
make an African film, like a period piece, like let's say like Game of Thrones in Africa. You can now do it, like you can now imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got feelings about AI that I'm still like working through. I think some of my tutlings would say like, this dude was like totally against AI, and they wouldn't be wrong.
Yeah, because there's major issues. Yeah.
Yeah, there
like
are.
environmental, copyright issues, like
Yeah.
ethics, like major stuff.
Yeah, so I'm still like figuring it out and traveling my own journey and seeing if there's ethical ways to use it and whatnot. But for the most part, I think it definitely does help like ease the process and help people. We just have to figure out how to use it. But also like film studies is hard. Like people, we're not just like having fun and dyeing our hair blue and just enjoying ourselves in class and doing nothing.
Yeah. No shade to the people who dye their hair blue.
No shade at all. But I mean, it's not just like it's not all we are. It's just it's just the facet of what people see and kind of assume that's all. That's all that happens. But I think what these tools can do is make it more accessible.
For sure,
Make it more where you're as film studies or as any academic study path, we need to make ourselves accessible to where I would hope a grade 10 person could read and be like, this is interesting, fascinating, tell me more. And sometimes I like read articles and stuff and I'm like, this is super hard to understand and like really challenging. So I think certain tools like AI, or whether it's just discussions like this or podcast or just conversations where we're showing these films and making them more accessible, creates more of a thing where it's not just in an institution, which is, it's great, but I think the work that a lot of us do is so that it's for the betterment of humanity, and for the betterment of people. And so I think that's what we need to figure out as aspiring academics and an academic, is to make our work more accessible. And so AI might be how we do that. I'm just not sure yet.
Yeah, we'll have to see.
We'll have to see.
But yeah, thank you so much for this. This was a really great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope students do too. We have Ian coming in next. Ian Reisdijk on the next episode. But yeah, thank you also everybody for listening to this, for watching this, and catch you on the next episode.